Hi everyone, I'm going to tell you about my lesson plan that I created for the case study. After reading the information about John, I decided to create a lesson about reading comprehension, specifically visualization, because I remember reading that they suggest to kind of tell John to make a movie when he's either reading or being read to, so to make a movie in his head. So my lesson title is Making a Movie. Course is English Language Arts. Unit theme, reading comprehension, visualization. It'll take about 30 minutes, so a typical lesson, and then it's on a one-to-one format. And so any information I know, the student has an IEP. The resources that would be needed would be 2 copies of the Great Gallardo's books without pictures, because we want him to create the pictures, and then the text to audio available for him, because that is something that was recommended in the case study write-up. And then also either a Chromebook with something for the student to access the program to create the illustrations, whether that be something like Storyboard That or Seesaw, and then also a different way for the student to create the illustration to give him the option of whether he wants to do it like in a technology format or in a physical paper format. So the idea of this, or the focus of this lesson, is to teach a strategy of comprehension, the strategy being visualization. And then my justification is that the student has been struggling with comprehension, so this lesson is an introduction for the strategy. The prior knowledge is that he knows what a story is and the difference between fiction and nonfiction. We will be reading a fiction story, so he knows how to determine that. And my learning objectives are that the student will be able to translate what is being read into an illustration, and the learning target is I will be able to make an illustration of what is being read to me. And then my content standard, this was the closest one that I could find. I know he's in 7th grade, but I found 4R3 in literary texts. Describe a character, setting, or event, drawing on specific details in the text. So I thought that was a way to kind of explain how he would be illustrating what he's seeing. So then down to the academic language demands. Interpret and illustrate the story that is being read to them to show comprehension. So my language function is our interpret, illustrate, and comprehension. And then my vocabulary, as you can see, is the illustrate, comprehension, and interpret. And my discourse is listening to a story, illustrating what they are hearing. And then my syntax is illustration using visuals. So for the diagnostics and pre-assessments, I referred back to what the case study said, which is the Gray Oral Reading Test 5 and then the Qualitative Reading Inventory 5. So for the formative assessment, I wrote however the student chooses to illustrate or interpret the story will be collected and feedback will be given, and that is a way to kind of incorporate the UDL as well, so that like the student has the choice of what they want, how they want to interpret, or how they want to represent what they're hearing. And then my summative assessment is my weekly reading comprehension check, which is part of my, or it's one of my goals and objectives, is to have weekly reading comprehension checks and then report to the every 4 weeks to the parent. So exceeding the expectation will that they can understand and comprehend what they're hearing and illustrate according to what being heard with no help from the teacher. Meeting expectations is comprehending what they're hearing and illustrating the story and with some help with the teacher. And then below expectations is just not being able to comprehend what they're hearing or illustrate, and even with getting help from the teacher, just not being able to make those connections. So I begin the lesson by giving them the opportunity to tell me, or asking them, what I want you to think about your favorite movie. Can you tell me something that happens and what you see when that happens? So you want to get them kind of thinking about what they're seeing when they're watching a movie to kind of be able to translate, how they're understanding what they're seeing in the movie to what they're reading and hearing and everything like that. So today, I want to say, today we're going to make a movie in our heads of what I'm going to read, and you're going to create that for me. And create illustrations and just kind of make sure you're doing that check of like making sure they remember what illustrations are, because they might have something in their head of what an illustration is, but it could be completely incorrect. And then next, for the middle, so I would say I'm going to read you an excerpt from the book, and they're going to have a copy as well, so if you need to check back on the story, you can. I want you to follow along with me, and you're going to create an illustration of what you hear when I read. So I want them to have the opportunity to look at the text as well, and then and I'll read it to them so I can kind of model what I expect, but have them be able to have the access to go back to the text if needed. And then this is when I would tell them that what I want them to do, and how that they would have the opportunity to choose how they want to illustrate what they're hearing, and then give them the time to choose it. So get that all situated and then go into reading so they don't have to think about it while they're reading. And then begin reading the excerpt. And I would pause after reading a little bit to explain what I expect and how I expect it to happen. So say, here, I'll show you the text. This has all the pictures, but I would print one without the pictures. But and then just kind of read a piece of it and just think about it and explain to them or show them how you want them to interpret, or what you expect, not how you want them, but what you expect for them to interpret. And then after that, I would continue reading the excerpt. I would only read a few pages. You don't want to overwhelm them, and it's you don't want to take super long for this this part of the lesson. Kind of want to let them show their comprehension. So after reading the excerpt, I want them to, you would say, I want you to work on illustrating what we just read, and remind them that they can look back at the book, and then, in this case, they can have it read to them again if they need, or if they need you to read it to them again, that's totally fine. So you can provide help where is needed, because you want to make sure that the student is understanding, and it is kind of a beginning. They're still learning the strategy, so you want to make sure they're understanding what they're learning. And then to wrap up the lesson, I would have them walk through what they created to check their understanding, because again, you want to make sure that they are actually comprehending what they're reading, and they're not just going through the motions, or making a disconnect somewhere. And then the teacher would make the corrections where it was needed, and they would keep their illustration. So if they made it on Seesaw or somewhere online, they would submit that to the teacher. But then but they would also have that copy to refer back to themselves. So supporting the student, provide the audio to text, and then allowing the student to choose their preferred way. Challenging above average students, you can, I believe this is from Reading A to Z, so I know that they have tiered text, so I would just give them, maybe more challenging text to illustrate. Facilitating a classroom environment that supports student learning. The student would be allowed to use their preferred way to illustrate the text, which would give them, that more what they're comfortable with to hopefully help them succeed. And then also giving them kind of a quiet environment, because I know when they're trying to focus just in any student, sometimes they can get overstimulated by the other students surrounding them. And then for an extension, the student would be able to read the entire story and then create illustrations for the remainder of the story. So they would be able to do the entire thing instead of just a small excerpt during the lesson. And then for the UDL component, for Principle 1, for the multiple means of representation, the student will be able to access the text both physically and have the text to audio version. They can be read to without the teacher being present. And then the student is also able to choose their preferred way of illustration, which gives them that opportunity to do what they're comfortable with. For Principle 2, for the multiple means of engagement, It's the lesson is designed to be a one-on-one instruction, and then within that lesson, the student has the options of how they're going to complete their work, which again gives them that choice. And for Principle 3, for the multiple means of expression, the student will have the ability to choose the means of representation that they feel most comfortable with. So they will either use the electronic version or the paper version to show their understanding and give them the opportunity to do what they feel comfortable with, instead of just saying, you have to do it on storyboard that, but then the student doesn't feel comfortable on using that kind of program. That wouldn't be good, because then the student would not be getting what they need out of the lesson. So that is it. I then have, just in my references, I have a link to the PDF of the book that I accessed, which is from Reading A to Z. I know I mentioned that earlier. So yes, I hope you enjoy my lesson, and thanks for watching.